Today I have the opportunity to speak with the presiding officer of the Nassau County Legislature, Richard Nicolello. Rich has been representing District 9, and he has been doing this for the last 25 years. I think this year is 25. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Elizabeth. It's great to see you again.
So this year, I believe, is 25 years for you. Is that correct?
I just completed 25, so now I'm in my 26th year.
Oh, I apologize. Well, we are grateful to have you as our representative, as well as being the presiding officer of the legislature. There's a lot going on in Nassau County, especially with this pandemic. COVID has been extremely hard on Long Island, and unfortunately, I think even the numbers in New York representing Long Island are the highest in New York. Is that correct? Yeah.
That's correct. But fortunately, those numbers are falling. I mean, they're falling all over the state, and they are falling here in Long Island. We still are a little bit higher in terms of the positivity rate than the rest of the state, but we're getting there.
Now, I know that in the past, our numbers sometimes have gone very high because people from New York City have crossed over, and our hospitals, which are Northwell is huge, especially located in New Hyde Park and then North, the one in Manhasset, right, yeah, is also relatively easy to access. Do you feel that the numbers still are inflated because of the crossover?
Would not be the positivity rate. I think that is strictly on the basis of residency. But in terms of hospitalizations, yes. I mean, I think the Commissioner of Health estimated maybe 20 to 25% in the hospitals here in Nassau would be New York City residents. Thank God the hospitalization numbers are down as well. So it's all good. But you know, to the extent of hospitalizations, when we were looking at those numbers in the spring, especially, they were being inflated to some extent by the fact that it was New York City residents. And then of course, it doesn't matter where anyone comes from for treatment. They're going to treat anyone no matter where they're coming from.
Absolutely. And I know that vaccination centers are being established as we speak. I noticed that Nassau Coliseum is being considered for one of the vaccination sites. And I had just heard that County Executive Curran mentioned CW Post as being a possible site also.
I have not heard CW Post yet, but that would certainly be a positive development. What we had seen was that the state has established a vaccination site at Yankee Stadium, and the city has one now at Citi Field. And there simply is not enough vaccine in Nassau County. And the most difficult part of this is that the seniors and those that are most vulnerable are having such difficulty getting appointments. I mean, our seniors, people with underlying conditions, they should be getting the vaccine first. So, I mean, we are getting a tremendous amount of calls and emails, and it is heartbreaking in a lot of ways. I mean, you're getting emails from 80-year-old, 80-year-old, 85-year-old, from their children who just want to make sure their parents are protected. And because they opened the eligibility lists so broadly, and there's limited supply, it's resulted in this crunch. And it's just, we need to get past this. We need to get those seniors, especially, vaccinated.
Oh, especially seniors. Yeah, they seem to be the most vulnerable out of all of the age groups, sorry. Do you feel that the opening up to a broader scale has restricted the availability of the vaccines? I mean, I understand that there was supposed to be a 5% increase in the number of vaccines available, but yet there's only so much that can be made. And I know that we're excited about Johnson and Johnson, but it's still not even approved yet. Um,
I do think that they opened the eligibility too quickly. You know, the example of that is one day, a couple of weeks ago, they expanded it, several weeks ago, they expanded eligibility to 75-year-olds and older. And the next day it was 65-year-olds and older. So, but again, I think what they need to do is to make sure that those that are most vulnerable get vaccinated first. For many of us, it's, you know, it'll be a bad flu, it'll be a bad cold, there could be other effects. But for the vast majority of the population, you know, you'll survive. But for people who are in that age group, the people that have conditions, diabetic conditions, and other immune compromised conditions, you know, it's a very, very, very serious illness. And then, you know, we have to protect. And we've known that since the spring. So again, we should be focusing on getting that vaccine to them first.
one of the things I guess that we spoke about last year was a legislation that was passed in New York State, which impacted our police to arrest small crime criminals and not them not receiving bail and just being let go back out in the streets. How I don't know if it has. I mean, I've heard several cases where you know the criminals have been caught and they're let go because they,
Right.
you know, they can't be charged. Has anything been done about that to change the law, or has it really had very little impact?
I think the state, since we spoke, tweaked the law a little bit. But it, you know, it is the criminal justice reform, the bail reform is in effect. And I don't think anyone is concerned about low-level crimes. You know, there's people not getting bail. They shouldn't get bail. No one should be sitting in jail because they have a misdemeanor charge against them or low-level crime. But people who are committing burglaries and robberies, yeah, they should have bail. And we're tracking the statistics, and some of them do, while they're out on bail, commit additional crimes. You know, interestingly, I mean, there was a spike in criminal activity right after this went into effect. And then by March of April last year, with the pandemic, you saw criminal activity just nosedive completely. So I think in terms of the effects, it's going to take maybe a longer period of time to really analyze and see what the effects are. But you know, again, what happened when the pandemic hit was people stayed home, and you saw the crime rate just drop precipitously. Probably the only good effect of this pandemic.
Yes, it was very, very surreal, I feel.
Yeah, exactly.
I never thought the world would stop, and it actually did for that short period of time. But a lot, I think, has erupted since then. You know, obviously there was the Black Lives Matter movement and then anti-police movement. And I know that in Nassau County, we last year, it was approved to build a new training center that was, I guess, by the Coliseum. What is the status of that project?
The training center should be finished and open with the first class going in June. So it's almost there.
Okay.
So again, you know, I think we all understand that there's a constant need to look at the training that police have. I mean, they're a paramilitary organization, so to the extent we can improve that training, to the extent we can make sure that they use situations when they're faced with and de-escalate when they can. Those are certainly what the police department needs to do, and they've acknowledged it in terms of, you know, undertaking new training regiments, I guess is the word. But so certainly the academy will I think assist in that project.
I know that a lot of the residents of Nassau County are grateful that we have a good police force that is supportive of neighborhoods and the neighborhood watch and to keep things under control. But now with this rising unemployment, and though I know it has somewhat been mitigated, there's still a tremendous unemployment rate, and poverty levels are increasing. Um, can you talk about what Nassau County has been looking at to alleviate the situation?
You are right, and I think the pandemic and the economic shutdowns have particularly affected lower income workers, those that can least afford to be out of work. And we've seen a tremendous increase in the use of pantries and a tremendous demand for the food services that are out there. So I mean, it's been a big concern of ours, and we certainly have been, to the extent that we can in the county. We've been passing we passed the CARES Act funding for the county that came down from the federal government. The legislature never stopped being in session throughout the entire pandemic. We passed all sorts of emergency measures, but we're doing what we can to strengthen the economy, uphold the economy. A lot of those workers are in the hospitality industry, which has been devastated. So to the extent we can get the restaurants back open in our other hospitality areas, I mean, I think it'll help everyone.
I know that we have a strong leader with our governor, but now that we have a new president in house, do you feel that more support is being given as far as the direction of, let's say, the vaccine rollout, and et cetera, or at least more information?
We haven't seen it at all level at this point, but that's, I mean, we're a county level, and it's still new, so we'll see what happens. I would think there would probably be more aid coming our way in terms of federal aid for localities and for states. So that certainly would be welcome. Although one of the things that I think they've discovered is that there was a concern about how much revenue governments would miss, and it hasn't been as bad as everyone forecast. We were looking at devastating cuts, and I think the state is in better shape than people thought, and I think the county is as well. But any additional revenues, obviously, can help us to provide the services that we need to provide, and make sure that the taxes are not impacted.
With this year being a very snowy year, I know that there's additional costs that usually come from snow plowing and stuff like that. With the COVID impact, has that precluded what normally occurs? Because I know typically when we get hit, it's not just once, it's like several times.
Like this year.
It seems never ending right now. How has that impacted Nassau County's ability to provide those services?
The day-to-day services are being provided, and the roads are being plowed, so that those types of services are still funded to the same extent that they were. The only thing that has delayed is some of our capital projects have been delayed because of the pandemic, in terms of having the resources available to go proceed with those capital projects. But the operational expenses of the county, they're basically all what they were before the pandemic. So that really hasn't and should not have affected those services that are being provided. Other than, for example, parks being closed and that type of stuff. But that wasn't budgetary. That was really health related.
Yeah. Now, even with this rollout of the vaccine, I do believe that our lives will be different going forward. Are the various agencies and parks that are under the control of Nassau County, are they putting together a plan related to, the what life will be like post-vaccine, I guess?
I think the major area that they're going to have to plan, and this includes both, the Parks Department as well as Save the Coliseum, is that when we get to the point where they can start having larger gatherings of people, I think there's still going to be restrictions in place, at least for the foreseeable future, and certainly for this year. So I think that how they're going to manage the larger events, and that also includes catering operations. I understand the governor is looking at expanding the maximum number to 150. So I think that's where the issue in terms of planning is. I think outside parks, I don't think it's going to be as much of an issue. And we've been using Nassau County parks, North Hempstead parks, and state parks all through the pandemic, and they've been, I think, the safest places you could be, especially when you're outdoors. But again, when they start to put people back into concert halls, I'd be interested to know, and I'm sure this is planning is going on. What kind of restrictions are there going to be? I mean, I think initially there probably will still be mask requirements when you're putting that many people in a small area, and with COVID's, hopefully the numbers will be dramatically reduced. But COVID, from what I'm reading, it's not going away anytime soon. So there'll still have to be some sort of protections in place, even with the vaccine.
The reassessment of real estate taxes throughout Nassau County is obviously one of the biggest challenges, especially right now. What has transpired recently in regards to that? I know that you're an advocate of changing the assessor to be a elected position.
Right.
Is that something that's going to happen in this upcoming election?
It has to be passed by the legislature, and if the county executive vetoes, we'd have to override that. And the reason it came up again was last year when we proposed it, I guess it was 2 years ago. It was opposed because the argument was, well, you should have somebody with the certifications and someone with assessing experience in that position as opposed to an elected official, who would probably wind up getting those qualifications anyway. But then recently the county executive, the current assessor moved to another position. The county executive proposed somebody that has none of those qualifications. So said if that was the rationale to defeat it the first time, then you've just proposed somebody that doesn't have those qualifications. So let's go to an elected assessor. But the thing about what we're proposing is we can't establish it. It has to be a referendum. So ultimately, the people would decide in November whether there's an assessor or not. The other issue with respect to assessment is the local law we had that would require that the tax bills online, the notices from the Department of Assessment show what the effects would be of the 5-year phasing of this assessment. So that is something I think that there needs to be some transparency to, that people should have an idea so that they can plan what their tax bill is going to look like. I mean, you can't get it down to the penny, but you can certainly make an estimate of how much someone's going to pay over the next 4 years as a result of the reassessment. So
I know that when this was originally the first reassessment, I guess over a decade ago under Swazi and now under Curran, there has been a tremendous turnover in houses. And I mean, it looked like a mass exodus actually in Manhasset. I feel like. I know that in one sense that this pandemic has helped people regain market value so that they, get more of profits out of their house because that's probably their most valuable asset that they own. But I mean, with this whole transition now to a virtual world, what do you feel is the impact going to be with, skilled labor really kind of moving out of New York? I mean, it no longer has to be here.
it is deeply concerning, and I think there was one study, I think, from one of the moving lines that indicated that the most moving van usage was in Nassau County. So it's deeply concerning. We used to talk about the loss of all the young talent who would go to school and then move out of state. Now it's the people who are working in jobs that no longer have to physically be here who potentially could be moving out. So it's deeply concerning. Just the loss of the human resources there, and the concern of going forward as to whether the effect that that'll have on tax and then potentially on jobs. So it's I know the real estate market in particular, the business side of it, the commercial side of it, they're having difficulty filling space, and I think that that's going to continue because I think most companies have realized that while they need some space, they don't need. I mean, their employees can work from home, so that the space that they actually need is going to be limited. So, I mean, I think it's going to result in changes to our economy. And the thing we have to do again is protect, our tax base, our quality of life here in Nassau County, and that job one there is making sure that we keep the taxes from going up.
I know that some sort of emergency action occurred at the end of the year related to the real estate taxes. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Well, there was an error with respect to the veterans exemption and the clergy exemption. So those who were receiving those exemptions did not get the correct amount of. I mean, the tax bills were not correct. They were paying too much in taxes. So we had to, on an emergency basis, we had to correct that error. Now, some people had not already paid their taxes, and then they've been given additional time to pay their taxes. But for those people, they will get corrected tax bills. But for those who already paid their taxes, they're going to get a refund later in the year, or hopefully in the next couple of months. So it affected several thousand taxpayers, homeowners, and the result of the county is, I think, where the county's going to lose, quote unquote, lose $5 million. In other words, we're going to wind up paying back $5 million in refunds. So, and that's not just the county's portion. That we'll be paying back the portion that was paid to the schools and the towns and the special districts. So we took a financial hit, but it was, unfortunately, it was one recent error on the top of a number of many errors over the course of this reassessment. Although this particular error was not reassessment, it was just assessment in general.
Your job as legislator, I believe any government official right now has a lot on their plate. Do you feel that it's more difficult now to be a government official than ever? And I've seen a lot retiring because they're kind of frustrated, or perhaps they're done. How do you feel about that? How do you feel about that?
It does seem like the issues are mounting. So it's not just one issue, it's having to deal with such a wide variety of issues. I mean, we've talked about reassessment. We talked about the bail reform, and the challenges to the assessed value of their properties. Criminal justice reform in terms of the police reform under the governor's order has to be done by April 1st. I mean, it just seems that there's so much going on at the same time. So it's from that perspective, it is, it's difficult to navigate through all those to reach the right decisions. The one thing I noticed that's different from when I started is the use of email by the vast bulk of the population has changed things tremendously. I mean, there's constant communication between myself as an elected official and the residents. And it's actually one of the most positive things. I mean, in the past, somebody would call your office or they'd write a letter and be a lag before you responded. But now you can respond and look at somebody's issues on a almost immediate basis. So that's positive. And the other part of that's been positive is during COVID we've had access to briefings from the Department of Health, giving information that people might not otherwise have. So I've been able to share that with the email addresses that we have. So so there are good things happening in government. But you're right though. It seems like there's so much going on. it can be overwhelming.
Yeah. Well, as I believe that you are a very um, fine representation of our governments, and that you always seem to be level and stable and a reassuring presence
Oh,
to the community, which
well,
I think we appreciate very much.
thank you very much. It's a very nice compliment. And, and you don't always hear a positive side in government. Usually you hear when things are wrong. So that's very nice of you to say that. I very much appreciate that, especially after having had this long career and being here all these years. So thank you very much.
So this year, I think you're up for re-election. Is that correct?
Yep.
Are you going to
Yes,
run?
I am. Yes, I am going to run for re-election this year. I'm. This may be it. This may be the last time, but I am going to run for one more term, and we'll see what happens then. Because
I think that's
my wife is retired. My wife is retired now, and so she's. I'm an attorney as well as a legislator, and between the two of them, it does occupy a tremendous amount of my time. So I think at some point in the near future, I will be looking to move on.
Well, we do appreciate your leadership, and we are glad that you're continuing. I also understand that the latest legislation that has come forth is related to dangerous dogs. What brought that up? And not that there aren't plenty of dangerous dogs, but
Yeah.
can you talk a little bit about that?
Actually, one of the legislators was attacked on. His dog was attacked, and he was attacked on. It was election day this year or last year. I'm trying to remember. But so we looked at the issue, and it was a dog that was in the neighborhood that was. I don't recall if it had been judicially determined to be dangerous, but it was a menace to the neighborhood. So the idea here is that this doesn't involve your two dogs fighting each other in the street or something like that. But what it does involve is there is a mechanism in the law where if a dog is dangerous, it can be deemed as such by a judge, and a judge can officially declare that animal to be a dangerous dog. So once a judge does that, what we've done is there will be a registry, which will be controlled by the ASPCA, where that dog will be listed on the registry. Secondly, the owner of the dog will have a responsibility to notify people within a certain radius of their home that this dog has been officially declared a dangerous dog. So again, we're talking about a more serious animal who's been determined by a judge to be particularly dangerous. So those are the ones that will be on the registry. We're not talking about, again, when you're walking down the street, two dogs don't like each other and nip at each other or something like that. We want to make sure that the average resident, the average animal doesn't get caught up in this thing. But again, if there is going to be a dog that's going to be judicially determined to be dangerous in your neighborhood, then you as a neighbor or potentially as a parent are going to want to know. So that's what this does.
I think it's actually very good legislation because we have seen stories in the past where dangerous dogs have killed. So
Yeah.
it is. I mean, I'm a dog lover, so but there are definitely those dogs that I wouldn't have as a pet. So.
No, and again, if it's your neighbor or someone living around the corner, you'd want to know that if you're bringing your children out for a walk or something, or your grandchildren, you probably want to avoid that block, right?
That definitely, especially since now, I mean, the one thing that we can do freely is to go for a walk, and if there is a dangerous animal, it's very useful to know that. So during your 25 years in the service, or now 26, what this past year, what do you feel is the most important legislation that was passed?
Again, I'd say probably the fact that we were in office for the entire year, working. We never missed a legislative meeting. We passed on an emergency basis all sorts of legislation or funding to make sure that the resources were there, whether it was businesses or individuals, the CARES Act funding. So those probably were some of the most important things. I mean, other than that, we also, in terms of this current budget, we had some disagreements with the administration as to how much revenue that we were going to be taking in, whether we should be borrowing the money to the extent that they wanted to. So we have established a fund that, to the extent revenue comes in beyond expected in 2021, it will go into this fund, and then the money will be available to pay back tax refunds and for other important purposes related to COVID. So I think that was a good government initiative. I mean, some of those things are not as sexy; they don't get as much play in the media,
Right.
but I mean, they're important for for the government.
Is FINRA still looming over in Nassau County?
I missed that part. I missed.
FINRA, the finance.
Yes, yes. That was all part of the issue. We wanted to.
Okay.
Once they borrowed the money, they effectively extended their lifespan, because once there are bonds outstanding that NIFA has issued, then they still exist. So that was one of the things we objected to, and we were able to, because we resisted it. They went from a 30-year borrowing to a 15-year borrowing. So we shortened the time period, save money, and hopefully sooner get rid of the oversight board.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Especially with interest rates so low.
Yep.
Well, I want to thank you so much for joining me today, and I hope that you'll join me in the future.
All
Since
right.
I know that you're going to run again.
Absolutely. Thank you for the invitation. And it was a little bit different than last year when we were in the studio, but thank God for this technology. I mean, if this happened 20 years ago, I don't know what we would have done.